Hi, everyone. Welcome tonight. As you're coming in, if you could just drop in the chat your name and where you're joining us from. Make sure that the default settings are changed to everyone so that we all can see who's joining us tonight. I'll go ahead and start. I'm joining us from Alexandria, Virginia. Let's see. Who else do we have on? Let's see. Giving people a chance to come in as you're coming in. Introduce yourself in the chat. Welcome. Hi, Kathleen. Hi, Caroline. Missouri's here. Michigan's here. Where are we? Where else? Blacksburg, Amy, Georgia. Nice. A lot of Detroit, a lot of Michigan folks. Welcome. Where else do we see? Afton, yep, Chris, and let's see. St. Louis. A lot of Michigan folks. Welcome, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. Coral Springs. Oh, hi, Audrey. Welcome. Somebody from Maine. Hi, Danica. Well, again, I just wanted to say thank you for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. You're here for Emancipation or Expansion to Emancipation, Contextualizing Episodes of 19th Century U.S. History with Web Maps. My name is Dalton Savage. I am an education coordinator with the National Council for History Education, also a co-founder of the Virginia Council for History Education. I'm joined by my colleague Amy Allen, who's another co-founder from Virginia Council for History Education. And then our lovely speakers for tonight, Chris Bunin with the Virginia Geographic Alliance. And then we also have Anita Palmer with GISetc. So without further ado, I just want to mention, again, thanking our presenters for being here. And this is a really interactive presentation. So if you have questions, comment them in the Q&A. There will be a Q&A period at the end, and then also just interact with the chat throughout. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Chris and Anita.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. This is the second installment of contextualizing episodes of U.S. history using web maps and web GIS. And tonight's focus is going to be on if you are teaching about 19th century U.S. history right now, what are those resources out there where you can utilize web GIS to contextualize the interplay between geography and history for your students and for your instruction? We're going to do a quick overview if you weren't with us for the first installment, just to review what is GIS and how can we utilize it in our history classrooms. This is a quote from a keynote speaker that I heard from back in my early years of learning about how to use web GIS in the history classroom. And he himself is a historical GIS expert. And he quoted, "In history, we usually know when something happened with a high degree of certainty. We may have less precise knowledge of where it happened." And I think for both Anita and I, that is what we see as the power of using geographic information systems to teach historical events, is that it does bring forth the power of place and the way in which you can't understand history without geography, and you can't understand geography without history. This image here shows a trench system in Dien Bien Phu, Vietnam, which if I show that to my students, it's a trench. When they see this trench accompanied with the arrow as to where I was standing when I took the picture, all sorts of questions show up. Where? Why there? Why should we care? And so forth. So Anita is now one more piece to this webinar before I pass on to Anita to further contextualize what GIS is. We are partly funded by the Virginia Geographic Alliance's initiative to begin to commemorate USVA 250 and the semi-quincentennial of U.S. independence, 250 years. And we shared this timeline before, but we're right in the heart of beginning 250 years of reflection and commemoration of U.S. and the 13 original states' independence. And just this past month, the Unite or Die political cartoon / image was published in a Pennsylvania Journal newspaper. And we do see that image in a number of different contexts in our society. And you can also see the other events that we've been commemorating throughout the 2024-2025 school year. So this This series is part of that initiative. So Anita, would you mind sharing with the folks what's GIS?
So GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems. And let me break it down. The G in GIS is the geography part. The map, the geography is in the map, and that is the vehicle for the visualization in a GIS. The I stands for information. What is it? Think about, what do we have today? So very much of it that sometimes our brains are like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what to do with all those data. And so that's what the information is the data part of the GIS. The S stands for system, and everything happens somewhere, and a GIS encompasses that locational data and processes it on a map. So the Geographic Information System, or GIS, is a computer system that analyzes and displays geographically referenced information. All right, so now let's look at the sandwich here, the map sandwich. The beauty of a GIS is that they're maps, and there are countless ways that GIS is used. So let me give you a more like business-like scenario. Chris will jump in with a more history scenario afterwards. So let's think about what if, those folks who were in Florida and the Gulf a couple months back, they kind of had this, a hurricane coming and it paused. So let's think about coastal communities in the US. What data layers might be needed to see that a person might wish to see if their house was at risk? So let's look at that sandwich. Think about the bottom layer there as maybe the coastal plain. It's a map, or it could be drawn, or it could be an aerial image of the coastal plain. And the second one is, let's say, drainage, of where the drainage is in that area. The third map from the bottom is, so how much rain came from the last rain event? And then the fourth one up could be, how might those change in the future? And then the fifth one could be at the top, or the fifth map up could be, where are you relative to all those layers on the map as well? So think in terms of squishing with a computer those layers and being able to look through them and being able to turn some of them on and off and visualize the data that you're wanting to see. So as an old person, I do remember teaching with, I was a classroom teacher as well, transparencies and an overhead projector. And think in terms of each one of those maps as a transparency with something on it, squish them together, and the kids could see through it and they went, got it.
Yeah, and for me, when I think of how many events and episodes we look at in history, we're really talking about points, lines, and areas. So one that I always think of is, why would we have wanted to purchase New Orleans and Western Florida for the initial Louisiana purchase? And if you put it into a GIS, the students can see the geographic significance of a watershed and how it all flowed to New Orleans and why that would be significant from a geopolitical and economic standpoint for the United States.
Absolutely.
Back to you, Anita. Can you explain this model real fast, and then we'll get into some geo
Yep.
inquiries.
Do it real quick. So this is the geographic inquiry model, and it's used in business and education. Lots of folks use it. And so at the beginning, when we want to do a project or introduce our students to something new, theoretically, we need to ask a question. Why about the topic or the place that we want to talk about? And when we introduce that new subject, the question is very important. So then we move on to acquire. what information is needed to answer our question. So we have to think about what data do we want to acquire and go look for. So the explore is that process of exploring and looking for the data and turning those data into tables, databases, charts, and maps. Progressing along, we look at analyze, using the power of that GIS technology that we just talked about to focus on relationships between the data that you have explored and gathered, and thinking about those data. Why is it there? And so what? And why do we care? And then the act, none of this does any good unless we do something with it. We might share those maps and data with others via a presentation. We could post it online. We could do a blog and talk about it. It's not useful if it's not shared with others. There's the geographic inquiry model.
Yeah, and so the software that we're sharing with you, it's free to all classrooms. You can get a organizational license for your school at no cost to you. And it is leading edge technology. It's a nice way to blend STEM learning with the humanities. And it's also a nice way to connect with your CTE courses and a really relevant workforce skill. As you decide to, if you decide to use these technologies, you do need to think about your purpose. Are you teaching with GIS, which is what I mostly do when I teach in my core social studies classes, or am I teaching GIS, which I do in my CTE geospatial technologies class that I also teach? And I do a couple of times a year teach my social studies students a bit of doing GIS when we're collecting data and analyzing patterns with regards to one example is recipe mapping and finding out where's your favorite recipes ingredients from originally and see the geography of that. So just think about, am I teaching with GIS or am I teaching GIS? And I know, Anita, maybe you just got back from a school division where you're seeing a school division that's embracing this idea of bringing GIS into social studies, aren't you?
Yes, about 85 freshmen. And what they did is they separated themselves into global regions, and they're looking at data of issues and geographic representations from around the globe. And then they're going to be actually bringing that, what they learn at the global level, and they'll end up seeing how those actually relate to the issues that we see in the community. And I'm not necessarily meaning these are bad, all bad issues. This is, good, bad, and different. But it's like, what do we know about global? And then how does that relate to what a student may see in their own community?
Yeah, that makes me think of a conversation I had today with a colleague who we were talking about in government classes about mapping community assets, whether it's healthcare facilities, after school care programs, like how could we map out what assets do we have in our community? And that's looking at what are our positives, what do we have, and then do we have gaps, So with that, Anita, I could talk forever about all these GIS things, but we also don't want to overwhelm you because a lot of times when people hear GIS, they may think this is too high tech for me, and we're here to tell you it's not. 10 years ago, the Esri software company enlisted a number of teachers to write classroom ready lessons to accompany classroom ready GIS maps that would highlight benchmark topics that were found in the most common textbooks used in many disciplines. And they named the activities geoinquiries. And these are designed to be taught in 15 to 20 minutes if you follow the script, or it can become a 30 to 45-minute activity if you want to go off script and enhance it with your own questions and knowledge. The collection, they created 10 collections, and you can see here the different collections. These are all, if you click on it, you are provided a map, a teacher guide, and a student worksheet. And you can see that they created 15 activities for each one of these different disciplines. And we're going to focus tonight on some that are in the U.S. History collection to help teach specifically 19th century U.S. history. If you open up a geo inquiry, you'll come to a landing page similar to this, and you will see, and Anita wanted me to point out that you might be drawn immediately to the download part, but really what you want to focus on are these resources here. You will be able to access a map, a teacher guide, and a student worksheet. And then you can see it lists the standards and the learning outcomes. And the standards are aligned to the C3 standards. Tonight, the geo inquiries that we pulled out that we wanted to highlight are the Second American Revolution, Westward Ho, the Underground Railroad, A Nation Divided, the American Civil War, Native American Lands 1819 to 2015, and the Geography of Emancipation. Because we're only here with you for a short time, we want to first start off with focusing on the Westward Ho geo inquiry, and then look at the Geography of Emancipation. Then we'll hit some of the highlights and some of these other geo inquiries. So we are going to open up the Westward Ho link. And again, as we shared, you come to a landing page like this, and you can open up the teacher guide. And the teacher guide is a 2-page PDF. It's really a script. And it's a simple script because very few teachers follow scripts. We often want to add our own piece to it. So you might find that some of the questions they ask are simple, and these were created under Creative Commons. So if you want to change the directions, change the map, you are more than welcome to do that. You will see that the geo inquiries follow the geographic inquiry model that Anita just shared with you. And it's again designed as just a bite-sized activity to fit into your regular, already busy workday and curriculum load. In the middle, you have a link to a map. And so I'm going to go ahead and open this up, Anita.
Chris, before you leave,
Yeah.
what am I seeing on there? They're in parentheses and italics at the end.
Oh, yeah.
Of those.
Yeah, so you'll see that the arrows represent the steps that you complete on the map. The question is the question you would ask your students, or they will answer on a worksheet. And then the parentheses, those are very simple answers to the questions.
Thanks.
And yep. And then if you follow down to the back, you'll see it follows the geo inquiry, and it does provide a few technical tips for some of the steps that are provided in the geo inquiry. And it also provides for you some possible next steps if you'd like to extend the activity. And it also highlights which textbooks that were referenced to see a similar type of map, and they show you which chapter and so forth. So to get the activity started, we'll go with opening up the map. And so this shows you westward expansion. Each one of these, Anita, I'll pass it to you.
All right. So, as Chris said, this is U.S. land acquisitions. On the GIS map, you can click around and you get pop-ups. And so as we're seeing, this is the original 13 colonies acquired, the acquisition date, who's acquired from, was there an agreement? So the farther west you get more information. Because purchases were happening, etc. And so that layer is actually, a very informational, and it's a great layer to be able to layer the other data on top of that. So Chris will now go in and, well, let me ask you a question, first of all. If you're looking at this map, can you imagine, well, go ahead and turn the layer on. I'm not sure we're going to be able to, yeah, okay. And then get rid of that guy, yeah. So turn on U.S. land, turn off U.S. land acquisitions. And we've already clicked on them. Ask yourself the question, why would somebody in the East at that point in time decide to move west during the 1800s? So you can put it in the chat, or we can just leave that kind of hanging around as we get more information. So then what Chris just did is he turned off the land acquisitions by clicking on the little eyeball. And then next to the layer about on travelers, he clicked on the eyeball and he turned those on. So we've got these kind of fun little creatures. So why don't you click on a few of those, Chris? And we can begin to see why they quotes as to why some people in that time period felt that they would wanted to migrate west. So they heard that there are a lot of goods from the Indians and Spanish in Santa Fe, plus it's the end of the country. I can set up a trading post there. So go ahead and click on another one. Almost done as a soldier, heard there was free land. Click on one of the women, Chris. We don't believe the same anymore as some others in the Church of Latter-day Saints. People around here don't want us to stay. And it goes on from there. So many reasons that folks had in their minds as to why they wanted to move west. So where were the starting points and destinations for the wagon trains? So Chris turned the wagon trains on, and we see that it was Council Bluffs, Iowa, and Independence. And then we'll turn on destinations. Which trail would you, okay, so turn on the destinations. Okay.
Want me to turn on the trails and the destinations? How do you want me to do this? So I can do it either way. So that's the beautiful part. I can, which one do you want?
Yeah, let's look, pause on the trails for just a second.
Okay.
Let's look at the symbology. Okay, that's what we call those. And we see, okay, we've got some crosses. We've got, let's see, what else is there, Chris? My image is too small.
We have, looks like a mining cart.
Yep, okay.
We have gold bars.
Ah, nice.
And we have Christian crosses, and we have, looks like some little brown animals.
All right, very cool. Okay, so the symbology, and they actually represent an end point, those symbols. Now let's turn on the trails, and it gets more interesting. And as we turn those on, you can see that you can actually click on those trails, and you get a lot more information. Travel dates, about the immigrants, etc. Now, in the activity, it will also ask about how long do you think how many miles do you think those were? Well, go ahead and unclick that, Chris. Take a look at, we're not going to actually do this because I want to leave time for the other activities, but where Chris just showed you, go ahead and just do a straight measure, Chris, real quick.
I can do that. Just to show you what I did, I'm clicking fast. Down here, you have a little toolbox.
Yep.
And when I click on it, it says, would you like to measure? And I do, and I can measure by distance.
And the kids can go, really detailed, or they can just kind of go click, click, and say, I'm guessing that you'll see. Yeah, so you're seeing that it's aggregating the distance in miles, etc. Okay. So basically you can ask them, okay, which trail looked like it was maybe the longest? If you actually click on the trails, it actually tells you the miles. So they can come back and they can take a look at that as well. Now, the whole key here is about how long do they think it would have taken them? How long were the folks on those trails? A wagon train traveled approximately 15 miles per day. So they can do a little bit of math. So the Oregon Trail pretty much took about 133 days, give or take. So that's about 4 to 5 months. And then if we turn off, so our final question here is, why were the networks or the trails established where they were? So if you turn off the acquisitions, and we can zoom in just ever so slightly,
Yeah, I can do
we
that.
can see that the students can now take a look at the land underneath. Why was that purple trail kind of smooth relative to the green one and the gold one? So as you see, there's definitely some physical features on the base map that is showing us that they had to, really augment and make their way around geography to get where they were going. So we could do lots more, but I don't want to hold us too much longer. And so this is just a great way the students can really explore all of those pop-ups. They can see there's a lot with those trails that will pop up, etc. So let's move on, Chris, to our next one.
All right, we're going to share with you a document that you can have for your own records that gives you the link to everything, that all the resources we're sharing tonight. So I'll put this in the chat box for you. So if you'd like to access any of the maps we're sharing, it's not just, it can be some show and tell, and you can see it yourself. The next activity I want to show you is, in addition to creating the national collection of Esri Geo Inquiries, they also partnered with some states, and the Virginia Geographic Alliance, which I represent, did create a collection of 11 geo inquiries. And if you click on this link for the Virginia Geo Inquiry Teacher Guide, it will open up this flip stack workbook.
Beautiful.
And if I go to full screen, if you work through the book, it works like a PDF book, but you will see that it brings you to each of the 11 geo inquiries that Virginia classroom teachers created to align with Virginia standards. And the one that I'm going to work with you with is the one that we created called the Geography of Emancipation. So this was written to pertain to the Virginia government recognizing Juneteenth as a state holiday, and then subsequently is now our most recent federal holiday. So working with a professor at North Carolina Central University, we created this activity that looks at the geographic effects of the Emancipation Proclamation. So similar to the last activity, you will open up the activity itself, which really the easiest way is in the flip stack. And if I open up the map, it'll bring you to this map. And the activity starts off with asking, what was Abraham Lincoln's thoughts about slavery in around 1862? And the activity has you look at 3 different map notes. The map note in New York includes a primary source of a letter he wrote to Horace Greeley, in which he explains that if he could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. If I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. The students are then asked to look at the geographic distribution of it percent enslaved throughout the southern United States, and are asked, how does this map and this distribution align with Abraham Lincoln's thoughts to Horace Greeley? They then open up the map note in Gallipolis, Ohio, where in September 22nd, 1862, Lincoln released published the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation to test out, like, what would the public opinion be of this proclamation. On the first day of January 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state in rebellion against the United States shall be then, thenceforth, and forever free. The proclamation then went through some committees and some negotiations, and the final proclamation was essentially the preliminary proclamation, except as the activity goes, with a little more time, I'd spend more time with my students. But the main addition to the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation was a statement that emancipated former slaves of suitable condition will be received into the armed service of the United States to garrison forts, positions, stations, and other places, and to man vessels of all sorts. So they added the condition that emancipated enslaved people could enlist in the Union Army. And then the way that this ties to Virginia studies and to Juneteenth is to have to look at what Virginians know as Fort Monroe and many people know as Freedom's Fortress. So I'm going to turn off a couple of layers to bring us to that. Let's see. So we're going to zoom in on a bookmark, and the activity says click on a bookmark and head to Freedom's Fortress. And Freedom's Fortress brings us to the opening of the Chesapeake Bay in Virginia. And it tells a story real quickly of Frank Baker, James Townsend, and Shepard Mallory, who were enslaved men who had been sent to Sewell's Point near Norfolk to build a battery of Confederate artillery. And then we're told they were going to be sent to Virginia to build more Confederate fortifications. They chose to flee, and they presented themselves to General Butler at Fort Monroe. And Fort Monroe, General Benjamin Butler, who was a former lawyer, believed that since they were there building fortifications against the Union, they were contraband, and they were freed and sent to Hampton, Virginia. And soon, with the networks, thousands of enslaved people came to Fort Monroe and were sent to be free in Hampton, Virginia. And Hampton, Virginia is credited with establishing the United States' first self-contained African American community. The way this community ties to the Emancipation Proclamation is on the campus of Hampton University is an oak known as Emancipation Oak. It was under this oak that the Emancipation Proclamation was read for the first time on Southern soil. And it's also under the tree where Mary Peak was the first Black teacher of the AMA and started classes under the tree. And so it holds a lot of history to this local community. In addition, this concept of contraband camps, refugee camps, emancipation camps, it really depends on the perspective to the Union government. The enslaved people were contraband. To some people, they were refugees. To many people, they were emancipated people who had worked themselves to be free. And what we see in the activity is that emancipation camps popped up all over the United States. And so when you open up the Confederate States bookmark, you will see that each one of these dots represents a emancipation camp once the Emancipation Proclamation was passed. Students also learn that the Emancipation Proclamation did not apply to everywhere in the United States, and they can see that with the layers. So what they will see is, turn on Civil War states, and then we turn on exempt areas. And each one of these yellow areas represents an area where President Lincoln's rules don't apply. And so if you click on the state of Tennessee, it will tell you why Tennessee was exempt from the Emancipation Proclamation. And so it reads, Tennessee, although a seceded state, did not fall under the provisions of the proclamation. Tennessee was under Union control, and Andrew Johnson was serving as the military governor. You click on the area of New Orleans, it takes right from the Emancipation Proclamation. The proclamation does not apply to the parishes of St. Bernard, Plaquemines, Jefferson, St. John, etc. And then if you're wondering, like, how does that apply to the Civil War? This is the generalized controlled area that the Union Army controlled in 1862. So my hope here is to show you how we're able to take what is a very simple concept in a child's mind when they hear about the Emancipation Proclamation and show just how messy and complex it really was. When I turn on these layers, it shows you a whole different understanding of that. In addition, the professor that we were working with, he really wanted to keep the legend messy for the emancipation camps. he wanted people to understand these weren't one size fits all. Some were camps, some were camps that were enlisting emancipated men and women to support the Union Army. Some were abandoned estates. Some were recaptured by the Confederate Army. Some experienced disease outbreak. Some became schools. Some were orphanages. So it starts to show a human side to a dot on the map. A couple of other layers to show you that the activity includes. The activity includes showing the military battles where recently emancipated enslaved men joined the fight to fight the Confederate Army. And when you click on one of these dots, it tells you the name of the battle in which these individuals served with the U.S. military. And then finally, when we talk about emancipation, we talk about why Juneteenth. What you will see here, and I'm just cutting off a couple of layers so it's not too messy, is there's a map node here that explains why we celebrate Juneteenth. And it explains how the Emancipation Proclamation was read in Galveston, Texas on June 19th, 1865, and it represented the freedom for the last remaining enslaved people in Texas. And so that's how Juneteenth became a national holiday. However, interestingly, if you travel to Ohio, they have a state Emancipation Day of September 22nd, because that is the day that the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation was written. So that's Ohio's state law. If you travel to Tennessee, Emancipation Day is August 8th, because that is the date that Andrew Johnson freed his slaves. So as they walk around, they learn that in Richmond, Virginia, they celebrate April 3rd as Emancipation Day, because that is the day the Confederate Army left Richmond, that was the capital of the Confederacy. So the whole goal of this activity is for students to understand how commemoration is scalable, that there's national and there's local and there's regional. And it really does help to contextualize why do we celebrate Juneteenth. And my hope is by you seeing me turning on these layers, it really does show how what we often simplify isn't that simple at all. And it shows that emancipation is many geographies. So that is the geography of emancipation activity. Anita, it looks like we have about 12 more minutes before Q&A. Let's see, what do you want to go to? You want to go to the Underground Railroad? You're muted.
Yes, yes. Let's go
Okay.
to Underground Railroad.
All righty.
Yeah.
So if you click on the link for the Underground Railroad, you will see that it comes up, same deal, brings you to the beautiful landing page, map, teacher's guide, student worksheet. This map will show some of the same geospatial data I just showed you, but visually different. So
Chris,
yeah,
when you put that map on there, and they think about the prior maps that they've seen, a student will do one activity and then they got it. I mean,
yeah, it's true.
because it you know, and I mean, that's really the only reason I'm interrupting, is because I mean, I just think it's very exciting to watch just the you know, anyway. Yeah.
You know, it's true. I use a geo inquiry in each unit I teach in my history and geography classes. And you're right. The first and second geo inquiry
Yeah.
takes a little more time, a few bumps along the way. But I also like that some kids pick it up quite quickly and they can become your teaching assistants.
Yes.
And I often, just so you know, I set a timer for about 15 to 20 minutes. And when the timer's off, we begin to review the highlights of the map. I don't go through the entire script. I really hit the pieces that I really wanted them to take away. And the number one question I ask is, what is something you learned about this topic that you did not know before? And it can be anything.
I love it.
And that starts the conversation.
And they have ownership.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the geography of emancipation activity, you will notice that this map displayed the distribution of enslaved persons in the South by percent, but I want to let you know that we visualize this as centroids or centers within a U.S. county. Not trying to get too GIS with it, but just showing you like this is a really flexible tool for visualization. In the Underground Railroad activity, we show the percent. Hold on, I lost my mouse. Where'd you go, mouse? There we go. It shows the distribution as the shape of the counties themselves. And so it has students look to see which areas of the southern states had the most enslaved people percentage wise. And you can notice that there were a number of counties that had over 80% enslaved. And if you click on this county, this brings you to the county of Washington that was 93.4% enslaved. And I just look at this, whenever I click on this county, I think of the contradiction of what Washington fought for, and then to see this other element of a county named after him that had 94% of its inhabitants enslaved.
And the student takes that percentage and they multiply that times the number of people. The reality of that is just, I think that's stark. And that's when it begins to make sense.
Yeah. And then the activity asks students to turn on the map note. And it starts to talk about the Underground Railroad, and it's and it has them read a part of the song, the Follow the Drinking Gourd. When the big river meets the little river, follow the drinking gourd, for the old man is waiting to carry you to freedom. And so this is one of my favorite questions to ask a kid, and I'll ask you too. Which river do you believe is the big river, and which river do you think is the little river? And I'll see if anybody gets it right in the chat box. So head to where the big river meets the little river. Anyone? What we got? Anybody gonna? Well, I'll tell you, most students will say it must be the Mississippi River and the Ohio River. And so this to me is one of my favorite pieces of GIS mapping. We can have the layers, you can have the layers show just the features that matter. So if I add US rivers layer, which means I just click on it, a tool over here pops up on the right, and it's called the filter tool. And I can add a filter to my layer. And I can say, show me the rivers where if I click follow, the answer is yes. And notice that the map just highlighted 2 rivers out of that whole network. And so the 2 rivers are the Ohio River and the Tennessee River. So for the Underground Railroad, reach to where the confluence of the Ohio and the Tennessee are, and you will reach freedom. So then you can turn on notable Underground Railroad stations. And interestingly, if I look at the legend here, right near that confluence is a station that was part of the reverse Underground Railroad. So that's another nice thing about this map. It brings up other elements of the Underground Railroad. There was the Underground Railroad to freedom, but there was also a network of capturing fugitive slaves and returning them to the South. And it just baffles me that the town is named Equality. And in Equality, you will find Crenshaw's old slave house located in Equality, Illinois. So we can zoom back out. And so we show the stations. I turn back on the layers. I can turn on the different routes, and students can start to see the many different networks that you could take to reach Windsor, Canada, which was really considered freedom given that slavery had been outlawed in the British Empire. And so this also shows that there was a Western route, a Midwest route, a Eastern route, and a water route to show different ways in which enslaved people used the Underground Railroad to reach freedom. And so this is an overview of the Underground Railroad GeoInquiry. Are there any questions or thoughts about this one? Let's see. So finally, to wrap it up, we'll show you another one because some of you might be teaching it soon. Anita, if it's okay, I'll go with the Civil War.
Sure,
How's
let's
that
do
sound?
that.
Does that sound good? Okay. So
Yeah.
just to show you a little bit that's nice, I know the Civil War is taught and there are a lot of maps and a lot of resources. So if you have those resources and they work for you, awesome. This one might also be a nice one to check out. This map shows you, just similar to the territorial acquisitions, the Union states, the border states, the Confederate states, and the Western territories. You can have them see, again, same layer, percent enslaved, and showing similar similar distribution that we saw on the Underground Railroad. And so I think one thing to let you know is how flexible these layers are. We're really using the exact same layer and just adding it to a different episode of US history. We can show you important Civil War cities. And if you click on any of these cities, it will tell you the name of the city and the population at the time in 1860. It shows you where Washington, D.C. is in relationship to Richmond, Virginia. You can turn on important battles. And the battles are animated. So if I push, give me just a second to move some. If I push play on my map, the battles show up chronologically through time. So if you want, you can push pause at certain points of the years that you're teaching the Civil War. And so perhaps you don't just use this activity for one activity, you use it to review your teaching of the Civil War, or you bring it out each day and say, hey, let's move the timeline to the point in which we're studying right now. You can also turn on a layer to show the different time periods of Union control of land. And if you bring up and discuss the Union blockade, you can visually show a student what a blockade means, and it shows you the extent of the Union blockade. So the script tells you the way to go through it. I just wanted to show you how many different dynamic GIS layers you have at your fingertips to help to contextualize the geography of the American Civil War. And that gets us to 8:48. So Anita, are there any other things that we want to
Well,
finish
show
up
us your
with?
list again, and we'll just see the
Okay.
other ones that you have.
Yep.
And Chris and I talked about Native American lands between 1819 and 2015. This activity was created about 10 years ago, and there's a lot of changes that have happened in these last 10 years. So when you use this, if you decide to use this activity, it looks at change over time by starting from the bottom and moving up, and you're able to see Native American lands, where they were originally, and then by era after era after era, how those lands were diminished. And it's a really, really good activity. There's some new work that's been done with a organization called nativelands.ca, and those are the indigenous populations, peoples. It's really, I guess I probably should have shown you that, but it's not in an activity that is in the GeoInquiries. But suffice it to say, there is some wonderful new data to add to this activity. And so if I were to be doing this, and you'll see what we end up with is Native American reservations. And then the student sees it was all native land to begin with, right? But also it's a great way to, if you bring in the native lands, and it's in there, in the, it's not in this collection, but it's in the ArcGIS online. What am I trying to say, Chris? Dictionary, if you will, in the data collection. If you bring that in and you show students the original GeoInquiry, and then you add that Native American land so they can take a look at that. I think it's just a wonderful juxtaposition, and it's a wonderful way to see how we continue to move forward in our data aggregation and data collection. So anyway, these data on this activity, these were not necessarily created by indigenous populations. The native lands, that's created by indigenous populations. So it's a really, really good way to show your students both lenses, if you will. Is that fair enough,
Yeah,
Chris?
yeah, and I do think, the big thing that you were trying to show is that so often students learn about the creation of the reservation system and their standards. I know that's covered in Virginia. And so they learn about this layer, but also do they understand the evolution of
Right.
this layer, and
Mhm.
how, beginning in 1819, this land was claimed by indigenous people.
Mhm.
And then you go 31 years later, and this is the land.
Right.
And then you look at these other pieces that contribute to further settlement of these lands and further pushing of indigenous people to the reservations that we have today. And
Absolutely.
the power of the visualization of the large amount of land, the small amount of land, is so
Mhm.
much more powerful than just hearing it or reading it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I will say, not to be too much, but I do love the using both this GeoInquiry. I created that one, um and I still think it's quite powerful. It's also really good to look at the native lands layer as well, because you'll see that where those reservations are, you get a very good idea. Those reservations aren't necessarily representative to the of the native tribes that were there to begin with. So there
Right.
was so much movement of moving indigenous native populations around to suit the time, etc. So anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, here is the Cherokee reservation here,
Mhm.
more Cherokee, Chickasaw, and so forth. I mean, just the beautiful part I love is that if a student asks me a question, I don't have the answer, this map might have the answer to me. I don't know what group was there. Let's click on the map and
Right.
find out, right? And I think that's the beautiful piece. Also, the beautiful piece is that if you have other elements you want to add to the story, you can do that with a little bit of learning GIS. You can add your own map notes and your own
Yeah.
contextualization to help enhance the teaching and learning of the interplay between geography and history and these
Absolutely.
events. So, Anita, last couple of slides to you.
Okay. So Chris, I'm going to pass that back
All
to you.
right.
Sorry.
So that's all right.
Yeah.
So in conclusion, we just want you to think about when you're teaching history, when does location matter? When do you have to deal with distance or direction? The concept of neighborhood, region, territory, or as my kids like to say, turf. What about the question of scale? A local study, regional study, national, or global? If these concepts show up in your class, we encourage you to give GIS and the geo inquiries a go.
Absolutely. The maps and their and the activities will really begin to spark thoughts in your students' minds. And so absolutely. I think they're just really so very useful.
And that is our presentation for you tonight. Thank you for joining us. I know, Amy, you've been collecting some questions, and we're prepared for that.
Yeah, so I just want to say, add my thank you. I know at the beginning, Dalton said thanks for hosting this, and I just want to add to that, Chris and Anita, thank you so much for joining us tonight and presenting this webinar. I know as I was listening and watching, I was actually texting back and forth a little bit with Dalton and like, oh, we could do this. Oh, I love this idea. Oh, I can see how this can apply, you know, and I am an elementary teacher by trade, and I don't know how many elementary teachers are on this call, but even at the sort of 3 through 5 grade level area, I can see lots of applications for this. So that's really exciting. Good presentation. Thank you. So we have just a few minutes left that if people have questions, we can answer them. So if you have a question, if you want to drop it in the Q&A bar or even in just the chat is fine as well. The only question we had in there so far is, will a recording of this be shared? And yes, it will. We will post this on the Virginia Council for History Education YouTube site. So you can expect that in the next week or so.
Amy, I want to let you know I have seen 3rd graders and 4th graders rocking GIS.
I
They can
believe it.
totally handle it.
Well, and I think especially, I mean, they're so used to technology, right? Doing things on iPads or whatever. Like, let's teach them how to use those skills in a different way. It's a great idea. I love it.
And I did notice that you did put in the nativelands.ca link in there. So copy that link, folks. It's been a few months since I've looked at it, and I see that more and more countries, more and more indigenous groups around the world are actually participating. So it's kind of powerful as well to add to the geo inquiries.
All right. Well, I don't see any questions popping up. So if nobody has any questions, I do want to remind you that this is just one in a series of webinars. And so we would love for you to join us next time for the 3rd one in the series. So watch for that. And NCHE also offers a lot of different professional development webinars, and Dalton has just dropped a link for those in the chat. So please check those out. Also, as you log off tonight, you will be asked to complete a survey, and we really encourage you to complete that survey so that we can tailor these sessions to what is interesting to you and you know, make sure that you're getting the most out of the time that you spend here. So thank you again to Chris and Anita for hosting this, and also thanks for everyone who attended tonight, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks.